When I was 14, my teacher wrote in my notebook, could do better if he stopped getting distracted. I wasn't distracted, I already knew the material. I was just thinking about something else. If you know that feeling, this video is for you. And here's the hardest thing to explain to people who don't have this kind of mind. It's not what you think, it's that you think too much, too fast, and stopping is not an option. And that's not a gift, that's exhausting. Today we're going to go through what it actually feels like to have a mind like this, not the highlight reel, not the gifted kid narrative. The full picture, the stuff that doesn't show up in personality tests or college recommendation letters. And I want you to track how many of these land for you personally, because by the end, something is going to click that most people spend their entire lives never putting into words. Let's get into it. The loneliness that has no clean name. Let's start here, because this is the one that hits the hardest and gets talked about the least. You can be in a room full of people, laughing, talking, completely present, and feel completely alone. Not lonely in the obvious way, not sad, just separate. Because while you're having the conversation everyone else is having, there's a whole other conversation happening underneath it. Questions that go too deep, connections that seem obvious to you and strange to everyone else. A layer of thinking that has nowhere to go, and you've learned, through experience, usually painful, that bringing it up shifts something in the room. People get quiet, or they change the subject, or they look at you like you've said something slightly too intense for a Tuesday evening. So you keep it in. You get very good at being socially normal, even charming. You learn how to hold back just enough so the room stays comfortable, while quietly carrying something that doesn't have a name. Here's what the research actually shows. Psychologists who study high intelligence have documented this for over 100 years. One of the earliest, Lady Hollingworth, back in the 1920s, called it the problem of communication. The smarter you are, the harder it is to find people who think at the same frequency. Not because smarter people are better, because the distance between how you process the world and how most people process the world creates a gap that's genuinely hard to bridge in casual conversation. Second, neuroscience adds something even more specific. Research on dopamine sensitivity suggests that highly intelligent people's reward systems respond more strongly to deep cognitive stimulation and more strongly to its absence. Which means surface conversation doesn't just feel boring, it feels like going hungry in a room full of food you can't quite reach. This is why you can leave a party where you talk to 20 people and feel more drained than when you arrived. Not because you're introverted necessarily, but because none of those conversations touched anything real. And your brain registers that as a deficit, not just a neutral experience. If you felt that your entire life without knowing why, now you know why. What's actually happening when you can't turn your brain off, most people call it overthinking. I'm like, it's a bad habit you could stop if you really tried hard enough. It's not a habit. Your brain has what neuroscientists call a more active default mode network, the region responsible for self-reflection, pattern recognition, and mental simulation. In most people, this network activates between tasks. When you're not doing anything, it turns on. In people like you, research suggests it runs during tasks too. Parallel, always. So while you're in a meeting, there's another layer of your brain underneath, modeling what's being said, questioning the assumptions, running through scenarios, tracking inconsistencies in real time. A study published in Neuropsychologia found that higher IQ correlates with significantly increased resting state connectivity in the prefrontal cortex, the exact region responsible for rumination. The brain literally cannot idle the way other brains can, and here's what that actually feels like on an average day. You're trying to fall asleep and your brain decides this is the perfect time to replay a conversation from 3 years ago and identify everything you could have said differently. You're in the shower and you've already solved 2 hypothetical arguments, planned next week, and started questioning whether your career is aligned with your actual values, all before the conditioner has rinsed out. That's not anxiety, that's not a flaw, that's the architecture. And once you understand that, the self-criticism starts to soften a little. You're not broken. You're running different software on the same hardware. The question isn't how to shut it down, it's how to work with it. The perfectionism that stops you before you start. Now the one that quietly ruins more potential than almost anything else. I don't mean the kind of perfectionism where you just like things to be neat. I mean the kind that stops you from starting, the kind that makes finishing something feel almost impossible, the kind where you look at your own work and feel quietly dissatisfied, even when everyone around you thinks it's great. Here's the psychology behind why this happens. Your brain can model the ideal version of something with remarkable clarity. You can see exactly what it should look like. You can feel the gap between where it is and where it could be, and that gap feels almost personal, almost insulting. Psychologists call it the intelligence achievement gap. The better you can mentally simulate an outcome, and the harder it is to accept anything less. And here's the part that most people don't expect. The smarter you are, the more clearly you can see every flaw in your own thinking, every gap in your knowledge, every place you could be wrong. Most people assume confidence scales with intelligence. You know more, you feel more certain. It often does the exact opposite. Research has consistently shown that highly intelligent people experience more self-doubt, not less, precisely because their self-monitoring is so accurate. They can see their own blind spots, they can identify their own biases. And that awareness, which should be a strength, can spiral into paralysis. The standard you're holding yourself to is invisible to most people around you. They see a finished product and think it's great. And you see every place it fell short of what it could have been. That's not arrogance. That's a real and specific kind of suffering that doesn't get named enough. Why decisions drain you in ways they don't drain other people? You'd think being smart would make decisions easier. More information, faster processing, better outcomes. But here's what actually happens. Intelligence multiplies the variables. You don't just see option A and option B. You see 12 versions of each, 3 ways each could go wrong, the downstream consequences 2 years from now, the emotional cost of being wrong, and, somewhere in there, the nagging awareness that you're probably overthinking this but can't stop. As behavioral economists call this analysis paralysis, and research shows it hits harder in high intelligence populations specifically because the brain is genuinely running all of those outcomes simultaneously. It's not indecisiveness as a character trait. It's a mind holding the full weight of a decision while everyone around you is wondering what's taking so long. And research on decision fatigue makes this even clearer. People who consider more variables per decision deplete their cognitive resources faster, which means you can feel completely wiped out by a choice that seems trivial to everyone else. What restaurant, what to reply to that message, whether to take the meeting, each one costs more than it should, and by the end of a day full of small decisions, you're running on empty in a way that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it. That's a real cost. Almost nobody talks about it. The boredom that feels like going slightly out of your mind. There's a specific kind of boredom that almost never gets talked about in these conversations. Not regular boredom, neurological boredom, the kind where your brain is actively seeking a level of stimulation that your environment simply isn't providing. And in the absence of it, you don't just zone out, you feel something closer to agitation. A low hum of discomfort, like static, like your mind is pacing in a room that's too small. This is why so many people like you have struggled in conventional systems their entire lives. School where the pace was set for the average student. A corporate jobs where the work was repetitive and the thinking was already done. Rigid routines where nothing unexpected ever happened. Not because you're difficult, not because you're lazy or uncommitted, because those environments don't generate enough cognitive load to keep your brain regulated. Research shows that people with higher IQs report significantly lower engagement in repetitive tasks, not just subjectively, but measurably. Their brain activity during low-demand tasks actually looks different from the average population. The brain isn't resting, it's looking for something to do, and when it can't find it, it creates its own stimulation. Worry, rumination, restlessness, it's not an attitude problem, it's a wiring problem. And once you understand that, so you can stop blaming yourself for not fitting systems that were never designed for how you're built, and start designing environments that actually work for you, the pattern recognition that won't turn off. Here's one that people almost never frame this way. Highly intelligent people notice things. That's the whole deal. Pattern recognition is fast, automatic, and constant, and that's useful until it isn't. Because it means you also notice inconsistencies. You notice when someone says one thing and does another. You notice the gap between what an organization claims to value and what it actually rewards. You notice systemic problems that other people walk past every day without registering. And here's what makes that genuinely hard to live with. You can't unsee a pattern once you've seen it. There's no off switch. So you carry this low-grade awareness of things that are wrong at every scale, from a friend's self-destructive pattern to a broken policy at work to something larger, without always having a clear outlet for it. Kazimierz Dabrowski, a Polish psychologist who studied giftedness for decades, called this overexcitability, a heightened responsiveness to the world that makes the emotional register of a highly intelligent person fundamentally more intense than what's visible on the surface. Research in moral psychology supports this. People with higher reasoning capacity tend to experience stronger emotional responses to perceived unfairness, not weaker, because they understand its implications more deeply. They can trace the consequences, they can see who gets hurt and how, and they can't unknow it. And that's not being dramatic or overly sensitive. That's how the brain processes the world when it's built the way yours is. The question that won't go quiet, and now the deepest one, the one that underlies all the others. Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist, Holocaust survivor, one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century, argued that the primary human drive isn't pleasure, isn't safety, isn't status, it's meaning. For people with minds like this, that search runs at a frequency most cultural frameworks weren't designed to answer. Conventional success doesn't quiet it. A good salary doesn't quiet it. Checking the boxes doesn't quiet it. Objectively fine circumstances don't quiet it. The question, is this it? Is this actually what I'm here for? Shows up even when everything looks fine from the outside. Even when you should, aimed by every external measure, feel satisfied. And that's the part that's almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't felt it. Because from the outside, it looks like ingratitude. It looks like someone who can't be happy, who keeps moving the goalposts, who has everything and still isn't content. What it actually is a mind that refuses to stop looking for something real. Research on intellectual giftedness consistently finds that this existential restlessness is one of the most commonly reported experiences in high-intelligence adults across cultures and across generations. It's not a phase, it's not immaturity, it's not something you'll grow out of once you find the right job or the right relationship. It's a signature of how this kind of brain processes its own existence, and the problem isn't the restlessness. And the restlessness is actually the thing that drives everything meaningful you'll ever do. The problem is not having a frame for it, going through your whole life feeling like something is wrong with you, when really your mind is just operating at a depth that most people around you aren't. What ties all of this together? The loneliness, the overthinking, the perfectionism, the decision fatigue, the boredom, the pattern recognition you can't turn off, the meaning question that never fully quiets. None of this is a diagnosis. None of it is a sentence. These aren't character flaws. They're not things that need to be fixed or medicated or managed away. They're the features of a particular kind of mind. And they come with real costs. Costs that most people around you will never see because they're invisible by nature. And here's what I've found to be true. Understanding this doesn't fix everything overnight. It doesn't make the loneliness disappear or the decisions get easier, but it does something specific. The confusion lifts, the self-criticism softens. You stop asking what's wrong with me and start asking what's actually happening inside me. And that shift from confusion to clarity is its own kind of meaning, which maybe, when you think about it, is the whole point. Before you go, I want to know which one of these hit hardest for you personally. The loneliness, the overthinking, the perfectionism, the meaning question. Drop it in the comments right now. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious which one felt most like being seen. And if this video gave you something real, subscribe. I go this deep every single week. The psychology of how your mind actually works, not the surface level stuff. Hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. I'll see you there.